Hello, and welcome to another episode of AP Taylor Swift, the podcast for Swifties who like to dive a layer deeper into the music. So lean in close, turn up your volume, because class is in session. We're your hosts. I'm Monty.
I'm Jen.
And I'm Jody.
And we are your unofficial professors of Taylor Swift.
Welcome back to another episode of AP Taylor Swift. We are back with another summer school episode for you. And today we're taking it back to our show and tell on ecocriticism. This was episode 7. Jen, why don't you ground us in what is ecocriticism?
Yes, definitely go back and listen to that episode because I will not be repeating everything I said there because we got into a lot.
Like a good teacher. That was pure teacher mode. I will not be repeating everything I said.
Wow. You should have been taking notes, so I guess revisit those. No. For the sake of time, I will keep it brief. 2 elements that we're going to probably revisit again at a high level. Ecocriticism is looking at the relationship between humans and nature and the role that nature plays in arts, literature, poetry, all of those things. So what is the symbolism of the nature? Why are we using that as symbolism? What is it implying? All of those things when we discuss metaphors, but specifically looking at nature. And then on the other hand, well, not really on the other hand, if we focus in more on ecocriticism, you get into the world of ecofeminism, which looks at the fact that historically nature has been gendered female, and that adds another layer of analysis of, okay, why are we using these metaphors, and how does that affect the way we see genders? How does that affect the way we see women in general? And how does the language we use affect the gender relationships in the world? So high level, those are the 2 things we're going to talk about probably. And well, I will definitely be talking about both of those things.
It's a nice light episode.
I will say.
Nice light topic.
Yeah,
light
it's probably
episode.
Not going to get depressing at all because the first one
not
was
at all.
So uplifting.
So uplifting. So the first song we're talking about today is Florida.
Florida!
Because we can't not headbang. This is track 8, Florida, written by Taylor Swift and Florence Welch of Florence and the Machine. So this one stuck out to me for, in particular, the first line. You can beat the heat if you beat the charges too. So we've got the heat. We also have the hurricane with my name when it came. And somewhere in here we have swamps, if I can find the lyric as well.
It's in the middle of the song somewhere, just like it's in the middle of the state.
Okay.
Monzi, you're helping. This is good.
We've got heat, swamps. We also have in this song, and I remember when we did the ecocriticism episode, I brought up Out of the Woods and talked a lot about the difference between the use of nature imagery in words as well as domestic imagery in words. Here in this song, we also have a lot of how she talks about the city. So the city reeks of driving myself crazy. Your home's really only the town. You'll get arrested. And then another, I don't know if this counts as nature, but just to wait out the shitstorm back in Texas as shitstorm nature. Anyway, so you get a lot of, I sense a lot of negativity and heaviness. And maybe I think of that just because when I hear you can beat the heat and the city reeks, I think of humidity and heat, and that makes you heavy and slow. And maybe I also think of, Florida's not where I want to be in the summer because I don't like heat and humidity. It's too much. My hair frizzes. I get sweaty. It's just not pretty. And so what does that do? It creates this almost go slow. I want to use the word swampy, but that's probably just because it's in the song.
Muggy, yeah.
Muggy, heavy.
Damp, moist.
Oh, no, sorry. People have immediately turned off this podcast, these words. But it creates this feeling that whether you have been to Florida or not, you can feel, and maybe I'm saying that because the air conditioning is off and it's getting a little muggy in my apartment. So I'm like, oh my God, I'm feeling it. I feel sweaty. I feel heavy. But she creates, this song is about escaping somewhere when things have gone, or things haven't gone as planned and you need to escape. And all the things that have, you're escaping the things that have gone wrong, this shitstorm. And so I think she uses this nature imagery to create this discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
That's the word I'm looking for. There's a lot of discomfort in this song created by heat, hurricane, swamps, and I feel it viscerally.
Well, nature is also something that we can't control, and those are
Mhm.
also a lot of the images that she uses. They wrote it together. The hurricane and that kind of thing. A hurricane is very strong, very out of control, and this song is all about really running away in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Again, whenever we talk about metaphors, if you've listened to previous episodes, this is not a new concept, but you have two things to look at: the meaning of the metaphor, which is chaos, all of those things, but then you also ask why this metaphor, so why a hurricane? And it is interesting, you say the hurricane with my name when it came. The idea that a hurricane is coming with your name on it, we don't need any more information. That metaphor, we absolutely immediately understand the destruction, the fear, the desire to flee. That metaphor gives us all of those emotions
Everything.
immediately.
And I think we talked about this a little bit offline, which is the connotations of certain things. Jody is really not a fan of Florida.
That's not true. Just not this Florida in the summer.
Right. Sorry, I didn't mean to put words in your mouth. But I apparently am a big fan of Florida, which I didn't know about myself until we really got into it.
Those are protected slacks that will never be released.
But when you were talking about humidity, I was like, man, living in dry California, I miss that humidity so much. I love it. I love moisture in my hair. But it's true that this song, it's what you were saying earlier, is it's a mix of there's natural forces, but then there's also some man-made forces that are positioned there together. And you're trying to figure out what is the purpose that both of these are playing. And certain things like beat the heat or there's a hurricane coming. I mean, the song is about escaping to Florida to get away from somewhere else, to get away from
the shitstorm in Texas.
Something bad. And it's interesting that you say like, yes, heat is gross or it's uncomfortable, but we can beat it because we're going away here. And then the way the music is, it makes you uncomfortable, but at the same time, it is also the escape. And so it's also the safe haven or the place that you're going to. And so I think that's really interesting, just how, I should say, that's really scintillating or stirring.
And we need to give context to listeners and listeners to past episodes. We realized we use the word interesting more than we would like. So we looked up.
More than vibes?
We looked up some potential. Well, we discussed some potential words, and then we looked it up.
Thesaurus.com, let's be
just
clear.
To see what thesaurus gave us.
It wasn't good.
And titillating is my personal favorite.
This is why AI will not replace us.
I'm tickled by her use.
Anyway, I'm tickled by our next song.
Okay, I have a real transition for the next song. Woo! All right, it's later in the evening, so it's going to be one of those episodes. An interesting thing to me about Florida, along with the nature, is there is some consumption happening here. Florida is one hell of a drug. Florida, can I use you up? And so, as you were saying, it's this idea of running away to Florida, but it's also this using of nature to hide, to escape. And the transition is, I believe that the idea of consumption is a big part of why I wanted to talk about the next song, which is Clara Bow, which is track number 16. It was written by Taylor Swift and Aaron Dessner. I have one line in particular I want to talk about, which was plucked like a rose. So pretty early in the song, there are the lyrics of, did you know you would be plucked like a rose?
Picked like a rose?
I thought it was plucked.
I think it says picked.
Potato. Either way.
Sure, tell that to Taylor. It's a violet haze, not a lavender haze.
Wait, well, we have found in the past that some of the lyrics online are different. So
I just have Google.
Either way, the main point I want to make:
the rose.
The rose is being taken. You're taking it away. You're cutting off its stem. There's a lot of things I would like to talk about here, but first and foremost, we're getting into ecofeminism here, but the idea that all of these young girls are a field of roses, and this, we're talking about the music industry a lot, or just Hollywood, fame, whatever it may be, a male-dominated industry. They are going in and they are choosing one of the roses to take away. Flowers are beautiful. I love getting bouquets of flowers, but by definition, if you are taking a rose away, if you're cutting the stem and plucking it, picking it, whatever, it will die. You are making it that there's no way that rose will survive, which is, and I think, an intentionally kind of a horrifying image here. But then I think there are also other things here, like the idea of virginity is often your flower. There's so much about the youth, virginity, purity of young girls that are waiting to be plucked, waiting to be picked by men. That's gross. And I think this song is trying to paint the picture of the grossness of this system.
Yeah, and we know just from some of the commentary that Taylor Swift has given around this song that she was very much concerned, or this song is very much about, and also she's referenced this in Miss Americana, her documentary. She was obsessed with this idea of whether she will be aged out of the industry. And so there's this idea that you have a clock running, you're going to be too old at some point and become irrelevant, and then the next young thing will come replace you. That whole thing has to do with the biological clock or the nature of things getting old and dying. And so I love that the rose becomes this metaphor for that, because roses wilt and die, to your point, if they are removed from their original source, but they
don't live forever anyway.
Well, that's not totally true. I believe roses are particularly are perennials.
Oh, they come back. Okay.
Which
fair.
means if you keep taking care of them and let them grow, they will keep coming back.
They'll come back, but they still die. Like there's seasonality.
Right.
And I think that's what we see in the song is the seasonality of women and girls in Hollywood.
In particular, a plucked rose or a picked rose will die. That line
will die. Exactly.
Especially maybe like a rose that is left planted has the opportunity to keep reinventing itself through 10 different eras, but picked rose perhaps cannot do that.
A phoenix that rises every time, perhaps.
There's actually, Jen, when you picked the song, I was like, this is not what I would, okay, let's see. But in looking through the lyrics, there's actually a lot of references to nature. Breath of fresh air through smoke ring, half moonshine, full eclipse, and then probably the most, it's hell on earth to be heavenly is a real powerful one. This is a good one.
And it's all nature imagery that is referring to young girls who are being essentially exploited for entertainment, often for the male gaze, for male pleasure, because it's all about, are you beautiful enough, promise to be dazzling, and the tying that into nature and the idea of using nature abusing it, and the way we do this to women too. That's where we get the ecofeminism, Mother Earth, all of that kind of stuff. It's a sad song.
It's very sad, yeah. So sad song, and the use of nature shows how sad it is. If we're ready to transition to the next one, I have one where nature is more of an escape. I Hate It Here. I know that doesn't sound like it wouldn't be a sad song, but it's not. Track 23, Taylor Swift and Aaron Dessner. The thing that stood out to me was I hate it here, so I will go to secret gardens in my mind. That's the most obvious one. But she also, again, I go back to what I talked about of the dichotomy between nature and man-made or city. She said, no mid-sized city hopes and small town fears. I'm there most of the year because I hate it here. And then we also have, and again, I believe this came up in our eco-criticism episode, the idea of space. And would the romantic poets be pro-space? You really got to go listen to episode 7 because it was a good one. Anyway, back to I Hate It Here. I Hate It Here. So the first chorus, she talks about secret gardens. And in the second chorus, she talks about lunar valleys in my mind. When they found a better planet, only the gentle survive. In this song, what she hates is the city, town, whatever is going on in her world, and where she escapes to, the good, is either a secret garden or a lunar valley. So either something terrestrial on Earth that is related to nature, or the extraterrestrial equivalent of nature, lunar valley. So really nature as a refuge, which is similar to what we saw in the lakes, which is what we discussed in episode 7.
We're not discussing Down Bad, but now I'm really wanting to do a side-by-side of Down Bad and I Hate It Here.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Note for the future.
The themes that Texas and Florida come up multiple times in this album. Space comes up multiple times in this album. So themes that obviously Taylor Swift 11 albums in has things that she repeats, but these are new and they're repeating within the same album. So it's very interesting.
As you were talking through this, I was thinking of Florida because we just discussed it 2 seconds ago, and we were also talking about how that's an escape and you're getting away to get
a very different type of escape though.
Yeah, but this theme in this song actually is something that has come up in many of her previous songs, of this like small town or rural space versus city, trying to get away from one to the other. Where do you feel more comfortable? What do they represent? It kind of comes over throughout her music.
The Lakes was all about getting away from the hunters with cell phones.
Yeah. That also has a rose, right?
A red rose grew up out of ice frozen ground with no one around to tweet it. This is what happens when we deep dive a song. The lyrics are just buried into my brain somewhere.
But see, a rose blooms in
ice frozen ground.
But if you didn't pluck it, it can survive.
Or pick it.
Cut it. Yeah. Yeah.
With the Eras Tour back in action, it is time to be bejeweled once again. If you're looking for rhinestones so you can DIY your Eras Tour outfit, look no further than Crowned Crystals. I rhinestoned my Lover glasses, some t-shirts, and a clear purse, all with Crowned Crystals rhinestones. It was beautiful, and I got so many compliments. And we've partnered with Crowned Crystals so that listeners can get 10% off of their order with code APTS. Head to crownedcrystals.com with 2 Ks, crowned with a K and crystals with a K, and use code APTS, and you too can make the whole place shimmer.
Well, this comparison of city, town to nature and escape is something I wanted to bring up in the next song that I wanted to talk about, which was The Prophecy, which is track 26. Gosh, there are so many songs. It was written by, again, Taylor Swift and Aaron Dessner. I'm just apparently on a Taylor Swift and Aaron Dessner train these days. And I wanted to talk about The Prophecy because there's several things in this particular song about nature. You know, I thought I caught lightning in a bottle, talking about I looked to the sky and said, that's the thing I really want to talk about, this idea that this narrator has essentially is gone from is not inside, she's outside, she's looking at the sky, is how I at least envision it, and talks about howling like a wolf at the moon, looking unstable, gathering with a coven around a sorceress's table, which there's a whole other world of conversation we'll have at some point.
We need a witches episode.
We say this every time.
I know. We'll do it.
The witches' connection to nature is a very big deal, and so that connection is very strong. There's something really interesting here to me about, I wanted to compare it just a tiny bit to But Daddy, I Love Him, because in But Daddy, I Love Him, and in some of the other songs, but particularly in that song, we have a town that clearly has these expectations and has a path of this is what you should do. And that didn't really work out for her. So, well, it did work out for her ultimately because she rejected those expectations. But then we're later on in the story and we have whole other stuff going on, and she's now out in nature and she's screaming at the sky, she's begging for things to change. And you have this dichotomy that came about, we talked about this a ton in our eco-criticism episode, so I won't get into it too much, but you have this dichotomy that came out around the Industrial Revolution of essentially nature versus science, civilized versus uncivilized, these juxtaposition of these two concepts. And I thought I really we just talked about in the last song, I apologize, and I see it here again of, well, I did everything I was supposed to do. We have so many things in the first half of the anthology of people raise you to cage you and all these things about society's expectations, and this song is so raw and this song is so vulnerable of please change it. She's not asking her fans, she's not asking any other person, she's asking nature. And again, to me, it reminded me of the lakes, of this screw science and society. I'm going to go out here and I'm going to be wild and carefree and honest and open in a way I can't be when I am in the civilized, quote unquote, society.
Yeah, I love that you did this song because I didn't initially see this as a direct tie-in to the natural world. But yes, of course, there's so many natural references. I think the initial tendency to focus on the supernatural of just like, this is magic, this is witchcraft, that's really strong. When you think prophecies, you think of something outside of the norm, some third dimension of power. However, to your earlier point, all of these witchcraft themes, they all go back to nature. The traditions of paganism and sorcery are all very much rooted in cultures that just use the signs of the natural world around them to help them deal with just the complexities of everyday life. And so, yeah, look at the moon for a sign, yell at the sky, try to see what is written through the natural world around you. And also, when you talk about that science versus nature idea, which we have discussed in the past, I think so much about the opposite of science is also things like sorcery or witchcraft or superstition. It actually, once again, buckets superstition with nature, which I don't know why that didn't click immediately, but now that you've said it, it's so obvious.
I didn't have this connection until Jen, you started talking, but it reminds me a lot of Outlander and that scene. And you watch Outlander.
Yeah.
There's a scene in one of the early seasons of Outlander in the Scottish Highlands where all the women are like in their cloaks dancing around Stonehenge.
Yeah.
Just when you talked about the coven and a prophecy and this blending of the supernatural and nature and how those two really are intertwined and come together. That's what this made me think of.
There is a very short book that I'll definitely put in the show notes called Witches, Midwives, and Nurses. And it tracks the history of women in medicine from when they were witches, again, definitely in quotes, and midwives and nurses. And it has that nature versus science battle. And it tracks a path of how men essentially were jealous of the power that women had in medicine, particularly around childbirth and all of those elements, and how that developed to where we are today, where statistically women are, known to be nurses. That's the feminine role, and men are the doctors. But a lot of women have died because the knowledge from nature was lost because of mass execution, essentially.
Very much being brought back these
Yes.
days. There's much more recognition of that, and it is making a comeback. Even in giant hospitals and institutions, you now see midwives and you see those kind of things, which is pretty cool. But yeah, and maybe that's why it's called supernatural. I don't know how these
natural
work, but
and super. Hello.
Yeah, it's like it's not just natural, it's supernatural. But yeah.
But in the song, I feel like there's a bit of going back to your roots as a woman that's happening, where nothing else has worked. So you're just going to go into the woods and scream at the sky and see if you can figure it out.
Hey,
which I get it.
Can't hurt to try.
I have those days.
Can't hurt to try.
Kind of along the lines of the world of magic, it kind of ties into the song that I picked, track 28. So again, we're all kind of in the same number of tracks, which we talked about this in our previous summer school episode, where there seems to be some sort of a narrative and arc going. I'm starting to see that coming again over here in the anthology songs. But I chose the song Peter. It's track 28. It's written by Taylor Swift. This song, I think many of us have come to realize, is an allusion to Peter Pan, or the world of Peter Pan and Neverland. Just right off the bat, the world of Peter Pan, J.M. Barrie's creation, it was originally a manuscript and a play. Neverland is a very nature-esque, magical kind of place. It's this place untouched by adults. It's untouched by industrialization. And J.M. Barrie lived in the city of London, and even the family that is portrayed at the beginning of this story is from London, and then the kids fly off to Neverland. And London at that time was at the height of industrialization, this really grimy, kind of nasty city. And Neverland was the opposite of that. And so that is kind of the framing right off the bat. But then within the song itself, you have really nice imagery like closets like cedar, trees, barks, words from the mouth of babes, promises oceans deep. You're again talking about the wonder of nature, the really magical elements of nature. Sometimes it gets me when crossing your jet stream. Jet stream is not quite as magical of a natural term, but it was in Finding Nemo, and it was pretty cool. And then once again, it's a space reference to galaxies here. Galaxies, of course, we talked about nature being expanded out to space, but galaxies also have this really magical, ethereal kind of feeling to them. So in this particular song, the way that nature is being used, I think, is very in a magical kind of mystical or beyond our understanding kind of way.
It's also very comforting and soothing. You say closets like cedar, and I can smell it, and I think back to being at home and all the precious things that my mom kept in a cedar closet.
It's all very earthy, right? Like cedar is an earthy word.
It's earthy, and again, I go back to and maybe I think the words themselves are earthy and calming and soothing, and how different that is from something like Florida, where it's heat, hurricane, and swamps. And again, all nature, but
Yeah.
very different connotations to create a very different picture and feeling in these very different songs.
Yeah, the nature words are always being used in a metaphorical sense. So closets like cedar, that's a simile. You have promises, oceans deep. Instantly, you know that the promise, when you say it's a deep promise, that's, I mean, the ocean is limitless to some degree. And yeah, the jet stream threw me off, but it's definitely a nature term. So I threw it in there.
Well, then you have too I hoped you'd return with your feet on the ground, which is an interesting use of the nature because so much of it is fantastical.
Yes.
But then we have the idea of being grounded, which is again nature, but it's coming down from the galaxies. And we won't explore it now, but I think there's something interesting going on in this album with the idea of nature and escape and fantasy, but also growing up and dealing with reality. And I feel like there's tension throughout the anthology, really, of trying to figure out where to land on that. Because in this song, those things are comforting, they are beautiful. I don't know if it's good to be so caught up in those fantasies, though.
Right.
But then she has other songs where she is caught up in, I hate it here. She wants to be in those fantasies.
I even go to the line, forgive me, Peter, please know that I tried to hold on to the days when you were mine, but the woman who sits by the window has turned out the light. So sitting by the window, looking out at nature, looking out at the jet stream, at the galaxies trying to find you, has gone to the man-made industrial, turned out the light, right? Has made this switch from looking to nature, Neverland nature, to back to kind of like snapped back to reality. Sorry, now I have Eminem in my head. Snapped back to reality and industrialization to turn out the light and put that away and no longer look out towards nature.
I mean, this is definitely a song that we'll need to revisit and deep dive at some point. The Peter and Wendy relationship here is one that we could probably talk about forever because Wendy is sitting by the window waiting for him for a long time because she ultimately chooses to go back. Wendy grows up. Peter stays young. Peter has a shadow. Shadows require a light. If you turn off the light, I mean,
gotta go watch this movie again.
There's a lot there. What's really interesting from the eco-criticism lens is that dichotomy again of the city versus the natural world. If we're saying nature is comforting, if we're saying that's the escape, if we're saying that is tied in some way to a mystical, magical, fantasy kind of place, and then reality is the opposite of that, you're really getting that imagery through the way that the nature is used.
It's also, I think, making this dichotomy too of nature versus science, but also youth versus maturity.
Yes, and that actually leads me to the final song that we're going to discuss today, which is also one that I picked, and it's also just going along on the theme of this anthology. It's track 30, Robin, and it's written by Taylor Swift and Aaron Dessner. This song, when I heard it, I definitely think that it's dedicated to children. Or
apparently it was recorded right after Aaron Dessner had his son named Robin.
That's so sweet.
It comes through in the song. And my notes that I wrote for this was, it feels like you're connecting to children through nature in this song because, once again, nature words sprinkled throughout the thing, but very different in the way that nature has been used in some of her music in the past. You have Long May You Roar at Your Dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are a very common childhood fascination, especially for young boys. I myself, one of my closest friends has a 3-year-old who is obsessed with dinosaurs and has a love-hate relationship with him. So shout out to Savan. Covered in mud, you have this natural phenomenon of mud, which is very dirty, but at the same time really fascinating for children to go splash and play with. You have dragonflies above your bed, which of course is a decoration maybe in the room, but also kids are obsessed with dragonflies, chasing dragonflies outside. If you're lying in a hammock outside, maybe there's dragonflies around there. And then you have a favorite spot on the swing set again explores nature and playing outside. So you have this exploration of nature through the eyes and lens of how children interact with nature very specifically and interact with the world, which is really fascinating because as humans, this is exactly kind of what is happening with the Neverland concept also. It's almost like as you grow up with the youth to childhood, youth, and adulthood, you let go of nature and it feels like you get tamed by this man-made world, or maybe confined to this man-made world. And the youth is when you're most free to just kind of be one with the earth, maybe in many ways.
I'm going to correct myself for a moment. Aaron Dessner has a son named Robin, but he was born in 2015, so it was long before. But he does have a son. He has a child named Robin. I love what you're talking about, Monty, how you just started to connect to this evolution of how you relate to nature as a child versus an adult. And again, if I go back to, this is the penultimate song on the anthology, and we've talked before about how these songs together fit a narrative arc, from exploring a relationship to evolving beyond it and being outside of it, and going through all of those feelings and emotions. And then we kind of come back to almost the end of the album, to this childlike view of the world, this innocence. And we're exploring this innocence through the most innocent way a child can play, which is just outside, which is, I'm going to date myself here, but I didn't have
electricity, Jody?
I didn't say, I don't say electronics, but like I absolutely had electronics. I watched a lot of television, but like I didn't have computer games or a cell phone as a kid. I did have computer games.
Jody's outing herself as an
Damn
immortal.
it.
Jody just revealed she's from the 1700s.
Okay, gonna say this again. We played outside as a kid a lot. Like I grew up in a neighborhood on a cul-de-sac where you could just be outside and run around, and there weren't a lot of cars, and you could just run outside, knock on somebody's door. Like we were outside a lot, and that's just the beauty of being a kid that I remember, at least, being outside until there were fireflies out in the summer, and then you'd start trying to catch them. This song captures that innocence really beautifully, and I think there's something really interesting about having that happen at the end of this very adult album.
Titillating, one might say.
Well, and then you have it's interesting. Man, it's
fascinating.
Yes, it's fascinating.
Clever.
Stirring.
Actually, I like stirring. I'm gonna go stirring. It is stirring to think about this, the emotions of it, of remembering your childhood, of the nostalgia. And then going back to the song we just discussed, Peter, the idea of holding on to that some of those childlike things becomes a problem at a certain point. And I think there's a balance of hold on to the fantasy, hold on to enjoying those simple things, but still be willing to take responsibility, to grow up and do good things and become a adult. But that doesn't mean letting go of everything. I really think that tension is in this album in so many ways. We see it even in some of the relationships. So there's some immaturity in some of the relationships that are fun and interesting and engaging, but then at the end of the day, those don't really last. So how do you try to get the best of both worlds, where you have the passion, the curiosity, the interest in the world, but you're also not being irresponsible or cruel at a certain point, or neglectful of things that need to be done? I think that we see in so many ways that happening, and I think nature is often used as the metaphor for getting to the heart of that conflict.
I also go back to our previous episode. All of our songs were on the front half of the album. In this episode, most of them are on the back half. And what does it mean that we found, again, we just looked at the entire album and picked songs, so we did not intentionally pick songs on the back, like on one half or the other. What does it mean that we found so much more nature and natural imagery on the back half than on the front half?
I think TTPD is all about toxic relationships, and I think the anthology is all about nature. No.
Yes, until we get to the next show and tell, where we're like, it's all Marxist theory.
Well, it is interesting that Clara Bow is the last one on that first part of the album, and we were talking about the innocence being plucked and having a time limit to it. And then you get into this part of the album that's really contrasting the man-made elements with nature in a lot of the songs. I think that was one consistent theme through all of these. And then you end with childhood. You're going from this fear of aging out to like almost going back in time to innocence and childhood. So that is really interesting, but I really, for the life of me, don't know what it means about this album. What I am convinced of now, though, is by the end of summer school, we will have figured it out.
Absolutely. There's no way we won't. So you can all absolutely bet on that.
Well, you're gonna have,
and you can directly message Monzi if it doesn't happen, because she's really spearheading this effort.
well, you're just gonna have to tune in to the next summer school episode to find out what else we learn about the Tortured Poets department.
That is all we have for you today on AP Taylor Swift. Be sure to rate and review us on your favorite podcast app. Follow us at AP Taylor Swift on all social channels to stay up to date. And join us next time as we overanalyze the next Taylor Swift song on AP Taylor Swift.